So again, thanks everybody for joining us. We will take Q&A after the initial session, so I'll just jump right into the structure here. So this is the introduction period. We have several panelists who have kindly accepted the job of being the first victims of our session here. So that'll be myself, Joel, and Scott. We're all officers of the chapter, and then we have Mike and David helping us sort of run the back end. I do want to call your attention to several of the social services that we've set up. So of course we have the website. We also now have a Facebook group, LinkedIn group. We also have the meetup where you may have signed up if you didn't sign up directly with the link. And then we've also started a Discord channel for members and non-members. So, feel free to use that link. We'll send this out to anyone who registered because I have those in the Zoom system. So we're can we just do an audio check? If someone from the attendees can just let us know if you can hear us or not, that'd be great.
Yep, loud and clear.
Okay, cool. Thanks, Bert. So we're going to run a couple of quick polls here just to get a sense of who's with us. We're going to give you like 2 minutes or 30 seconds, sorry, to answer a quick question. All right, great. Thank you. So that's good to see that we have some folks that are not members. That's great. Thanks for joining us. And then because our topic is going to be focused on AI, just let us know your thoughts here. All right, good. So we have pretty much a 50-50 split on the have they used AI tools. So that'll be interesting. So feel free to ask those questions in a Q&A if there's something specific you want us to touch on. Our topic today will be AI impact on cybersecurity at a high level. I don't know if Joel or Scott, you guys want to start, or Mike, you want to throw a question out? How do you want to run the panel?
That's a good question, Ali. I'd say if people have questions up front, it would be great to just hear from them first, so we can try to, weave some of that in. We have a rough outline, but there's plenty of room for, I guess, accommodating that as we go. So that would be great if we could hear from folks.
So while the guys who have attended, or even some of the other folks who are on video have questions, I'll just start with an introduction. How's that? So that there's less pressure on someone throwing a question out. Fair. So I think, if you are in tech and are listening to anybody anymore, it's all about AI. As someone who is actually using the tools and building for clients right now, there's a lot of course, marketing hype around what it can do, what it can't do. But ultimately, the board we had a discussion about this a couple of weeks ago, and what it really comes down to is the same rules around governance, security, privacy apply. So anytime you're going to give your data to something else to process, you would have certain rules that you would follow to do that. So it doesn't change those rules. It just makes it a little bit more critical to because of the ease of access, to ensure that people understand the ramifications of using these tools. So for example, anyone can essentially go get a ChatGPT account and start sending it information, which, we've already seen some stories about private information being uploaded when they thought it was going to be private, when of course it's not, unless you're using a private service. So just to underline this, it's no different than any other service you would partner with, any other SaaS service you would partner with, ensuring that your data is going to be safe. That being said, if I were to say, what are the top 5 things that I would want to think about as a security professional or a compliance professional, number one always is data security, like controlling the data. Where is it going and what is it doing? Number 2 would be verification and authentication, is again making sure that who you're giving the data to is really who they are. So for example, deep fakes and voice changing and all these other items, trying to come up with ways to mitigate or remediate against those types of issues. Compliance and regulation, ensuring that whatever tools you're letting your folks use with your internal data, you're vetting it in advance. So you kind of need to be ahead of the game here. You can't wait until the horse is out of the barn, as they say. You got to be upfront, you got to be in it, and you can't just ignore it. Really important. And then I think, if you just talk about human factors, bias, error, things like that may be in the data, that some of your folks might use a system, take that data, then use it internally. There's risk there as well, regardless of whether they're feeding your data into that system. So those are kind of 4.5, 5 topic high level elements that we can dive into more if that's interesting, or if you have specific questions around certain tools and what impacts they might have. I'm happy to have, we're happy to discuss that as well. But that, I think, is a pretty solid intro. And I don't know, Joel or Scott, if you want to add anything to that from what you should be looking out for as a security person related to generative AI in the market today.
And as a heads up, we do have a couple questions in from Alan that we can address as well, but I didn't want to step ahead of Scott and Joel.
Ali, I don't really want to add too much to what you said, particularly about like when we talk about generative program stuff. I think, and the questions kind of lead us in sort of a different way. I think, we'd focus around tools like ChatGPT, obviously, but there's tons. The one point I think that we talked about when outlining what we were going to talk about tonight was just AI. It's people think about the new shiny stuff, but it's not all new and shiny, right? You can go back to the 70s and discover that you've been using AI for a long time. So the question really becomes how to fit that into a general framework, how to think about it from a security perspective. I think we were focused on data and tools like ChatGPT and what the implications were. I see Alan's questions are kind of going into the use of AI for the security function. And in some general ways, the answers are kind of the same, but then obviously we could get caught diving into just that topic for way more than the time we have. So maybe I'll just leave it at that we'll talk, I think, generally, and maybe we can give a few specific examples. I don't know, Joel, I don't want to leave others out of this.
And we have another question about how would we define AI? And I think that's a good segue as well. Like, what are we talking about? We're talking about essentially advanced machine learning that has new capabilities of adapting and learning. So it has new buzzwords, but it's old stuff. And as Ali was pointing out, I think that one of the clear things is it's the old solutions. Don't trust what you read on the internet. Do your own research. It can give you a shortcut, but don't just believe it because you saw it online. So you have the accuracy issues that are bound to come up, and also it's trained on people's information, which of course makes it inaccurate or less accurate. But it will say it certainly, and I think that's the biggest confusion is trusting it. I think for security tools, that's going to streamline things. You don't need to have analysts running SQL queries because they can say, hey, where did this show up before? That's going to be amazing. But those
Trevor has sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Trevor has a really interesting question. He's curious on who owns ChatGPT.
OpenAI?
Yeah, OpenAI is the company, that research project specific. That is not the only example of large language model AIs that are out there, but that's the shiny one everyone's talking about. So
your question, because it's in quotes, if your question is who owns the technology, that would be OpenAI. There's still an open question, which will, I'm sure, eventually be challenged in court. who owns the output based on the source material that's cited. So, you know, if you tell ChatGPT to cite its sources, it will. And so someone may claim that that's you know, because copyright law is never really clear. That's really a good question. That would have to be something you would have to discuss internally and determine your comfort level with the fact that the information that's being generated is based on prior human generated information, which certainly has some sort of copyright or license related to it.
Yeah, it's certainly a possibility, but to underscore the truth and accuracy angle that David was mentioning earlier, at least in the case of ChatGPT, which again is just one implementation of these things, that has actually been shown to create citations that don't actually exist. So I think some of that goes back to how these models function, and we describe it as machine learning. And in some ways, learning may be, at least my perspective personally, is that that's a bit of an overstatement. In that behind the scenes, there's, you know, some fancy mathematical modeling and algorithms functioning, but it's really just mathematical mapping. And it's using these maps to kind of recreate patterns that it has become familiar with. So it's not necessarily like a human being bringing some sort of judgment to it. So the truth and accuracy angle is something that's really important to keep in mind when looking at the output of these. It's really not like getting an answer from a human subject matter expert yet.
I would say even not as good as Google search that we got familiar with. Jumps a few steps ahead.
Mhm.
We had a question from Jennifer asking about how would security teams look to guide AI usage, and do we have any advice? To start off with that, I think that the first thing that came to my mind when reading that was I would treat it kind of like phishing. There's some external thing that wants information from you. You just have to limit what you give it. And I think teaching people with data privacy, like, yes, you can say, give me a template of a script of something I want to run, but you're not giving it information that is not generic. It's not specific. So I think it'd just be generally data governance rules. Don't share sensitive data outside of your company. But then you phrase your questions appropriately. It can help you. What's a Terraform script? How do you do this in AWS? There might be really good ways to benefit from it, but I think it's kind of focus on it. Don't just believe it's the answer to all of your questions.
Kind of expanding upon that, what are your thoughts of getting an on-prem solution to address those security concerns so that you can share it private and sensitive information?
That's bound to be the next direction. I know when Google had their local search box that they could give you, Amazon has their Snowflake they can send you for data transport. That's bound to be it. But I saw like Firefox just put like 30 million into a proposed project for privacy. And I don't see other people really letting that go. What was funny though is Firefox is there's an extension that'll give you privacy on ChatGPT, but it just gives you privacy on the local computer. It's knowing nothing about the sensitive data you gave to ChatGPT. It just isn't on the library computer anymore. So I thought that was a funny way of sanitizing one end of the problem.
Well, and also if you think about the Microsoft investment in OpenAI, Microsoft does now offer a private training capability with GPT-3, 3.5, and now 4 is in test. So you can actually provide a completely private capability, and that's what we've done with our clients. Is we're able to deploy private instances and then not have to worry about that data leaking into the general zeitgeist of the information that it trains itself on. So you can leverage multiple approaches. So that I would say is more of a hybrid approach, right? So you're creating a private data set and letting it train itself. You have your on-site, which is possible. I mean, you can start up a large language model pretty simply today. There's lots of recipes online to do it on your own machine. But at the end of the day, it's all, like we've all been saying, is it's really the same as, and I know we're maybe taking the air out of the hype balloon, but it's really the same strategy as any other technology you would use. You need to analyze the you I'll ultimately start with a threat model. Like you're asking Jennifer's question about how should we respond to this question. The first thing you should do is a threat model. And you should understand what is the threat and what is the surface area of the problem. And then create the same kind of management and policies you would against any other tool that you, I mean, when cloud was a big thing, ASP, whatever, hosted services, this was the same kind of problem security people had to deal with. Oh my God, you want to take all my data and stick it in someone else's data center? Yeah. Okay, so how do we solve that problem? It's the same type of conversation that you really need to have for that.
So Alan had asked a question in regard to how do we find a balance between good applications of AI and bad, and you kind of touched upon how with any new technology, there's going to be these kind of problems in regard to that. The adversary is going to find ways to utilize this new technology, but there's also ways that we can lean on that technology as well to help our defensive posture. I was wondering if anybody had any thoughts in that regard. Either way.
Well, maybe we jump in and kind of, we have this taxonomy. When you talk about defensive posture, the first thing that comes to mind for me when that question was asked was just, if you understand sort of next generation or application identifying firewalls, that's an AI technology, right? And I think in terms of good versus bad or so on, that's a very focused model based on a lot of learning and a lot of data, but in a very, very narrow space. So the results from those types of AI tend to be a lot more useful right away because they're not trying to be a general model. It's saying network threats look like this, applications look like this, I can identify that. And if you have one of these firewall capabilities, you can sort of raise your game in terms of the way you analyze threats, the way you create rules to deal with threats. So that's an example of a way this is being used now all over the place, but very focused, right? One of the issues I think that came up, and I work at a school district, so a lot of intellectual property protection within the district, that's not really a thing, right? We're more about helping kids learn, and that's more of an open kind of model. But we have a significant amount of software, probably a lot more than most companies would, because it's the flavor of the day in terms of educational software. So we have literally thousands of vendors. And you sign agreements with those vendors not to release their intellectual property. And using stuff like ChatGPT or whatever, it's very, very easy to try to, even just when creating like user instructions for use within your environment or whatever, to create liability for yourselves by getting that out in the public domain. There is a way to track it back to you. It becomes a problem. That's insidious, right?
Oh,
and that's not
sorry,
even
it sounds like we're having an audio problem.
Is that mine?
Sounds good to me.
Sounds good to me as well.
Okay. Anyway, that's not even a the big incident problem, right? That sort of creeps up on you. But if a company can tie that back to you, that's going to be a really bad day because you fail to protect you fail to, I guess, fulfill your contractual obligation to deal with that. So that's an example of something fairly easy that can happen. Obviously, we have heard already with ChatGPT, internal people knocking around internal things and sharing it with the model, and the model does its mathematical calculation, and then that starts to be a suggestion for other clients. That's obviously a huge problem depending on what got put in there. If that's the core of the IP you're going to bring to market in a year, that you could lose the whole game if you're a startup, right? I mean, that's really bad. Obviously we already know the AI modeling in terms of like phishing attempts and so on, that's already there, it's already happening. I'd say even when you have an organization that's trained well to deal with regular phishing. The tests we've run like night and day in terms of the success. People are really good at dropping easy phishing, but AI generated phishing, it's the vast majority of people are clicking through on those, and that's kind of keeping me up at night a little bit because we have a lot of people clicking stuff. So those are some examples, I think, of what's out there. And I think, we talk about just like anything you have, right? Just like anything you do, your policies, your threat model, whether or not you're protecting IP and to what level. Do you have an R&D function? It doesn't have to be AI. It's just straight data sharing. All your policies still play out. I'd say rather, you want to tweak those to include the concept of AI rather than try to write AI specific policy, right? Or enforce in an AI specific way. Because you play whack-a-mole with applications, you're never gonna get there. I think I'll stop now because I haven't kept up with the questions. I just want to see.
No worries. Alan also expanded to say he was thinking about securing versus destroying things with using AI. And I think that personally, what I would think is I would trust AI to destroy things far more than secure them. I think securing them to give us brainstorms like you should do this, and figure it out. If you breaking things is easy, building things properly is harder. So I would not trust AI to build things for me. A commercial AI. We have security tools. I don't know how the log analysis works by some of our vendors. They say there's an alert they detected with composite alerts with a whole bunch of conditional statements. I've had others say, "Yo, we got rid of people. We have computers doing that now." So I think that yes, it will automate the things that are good to automate based on their data set. They'll become accurate and do the things you want them to. But like with the commercial ChatGPT version, I think it'd be mainly just like kind of working with like a young person who's entering the field, trying to figure out, well, trial and error, how do we do this? It will get better and refined, but I think currently it shouldn't be you shouldn't trust it to secure things. You should trust it to give you ideas on how something could be secured.
Yeah, so I think that I'll break this into two areas for AI. There's structured data and then there's unstructured, right? So the big hype right now is about unstructured natural language, et cetera, et cetera. But the other stuff out there like, pattern matching, predictive analytics on structured data, that's been around for a while, as Scott mentioned. Like, so for security and looking at high volume patterns and raising issues and making people more effective to manage security, those are all tools that you're probably using already today. That's in the back end already. It's learning, but it's much more structured, so it's easier. It's an easier problem to solve than completely unstructured data. For example, creating images. I would even venture to say that things like deepfake, so video creation and voice creation, is much easier than taking a simple question asked by a human being and then creating an answer that is relatively right. That is a much harder problem and that's why the models are much bigger. Or taking a prompt and creating an image from scratch that is completely generally original, that's a harder problem to do well. And that's where it started to leave the realm of straight, large structured data management to taking all this unstructured data from all these different sources and creating a model that can answer just about any question with the system, of course, thinks it's correct. That's why I think David mentioned and Joel mentioned you have to look at it with some skepticism because it is still, version 001. If you think about it, they're giving it major version numbers, but at the end of the day, this stuff is still really new. So just take that approach. So when the question about using AI to secure things, I think you're already doing that, right? If you're using Splunk or any kind of log management system, there's analytics there. If you're using a SIM, there's math models behind that, the good ones. If you're using any kind of identity protection, there's math models behind that to look at patterns and figure things out. So you're already using those things. But because the data set is known and fixed, they can be much more easily understood as well as checked, right? It's really easy to check if a sim tells you something's bad, you go look at the data and say yes or no, right? It's really, from a Bayesian perspective, that's really easy to say plus minus, or yes, no, or right, wrong. So I think that as long as you look at it as two realms, you've got structured data, you've got unstructured data, where we're moving, a lot of what we're doing is completely unstructured, language-based things to help people be more efficient. As you said, Dave, all the things we're doing, they're not designed to replace someone. They're designed to make it easier for them to do what they're already doing in their daily workflow. Customer service, order entry, order management, workflows around business decision-making, things of that nature is what we're using it right now. But for our clients, regardless of their size or their maturity in their security, we're using 100% private. We're not doing anything public. So that's just a rule we set internally, that we would not use the public services, just to ensure that, there would be no chance that something may leak inadvertently. Hopefully that's gives you some idea, Alan, of using AI for defense, from a defensive perspective.
Yeah, it's essentially a tool. It can be good or bad, but you should not use your tools.
Yep, just think of a hammer. So next question we have is, what are some examples of issues with AI that you've seen or experienced in the field that help raise awareness of the real threats out there? Anybody want to take that? Or
I sort of did earlier. I think the phishing example. If you've seen most of the vendors of high-end protection software, where there's user training, have an AI generator for phishing. I can tell you again, I said this, but the pass rate is abysmal for those tests, and I've already seen actual AI generated stuff coming through. It's still the kind of thing where I could tell, but I had to think about it. And I suspect that not too far from now, this could be completely, the idea of training users to catch this may be simply out the window. The way we've been training it, at least, you have to completely change your mindset to be like, even if it's from me and you know me, don't trust it unless you check it, or something like that. It's pretty bad. And that's something we've been dealing with for years. So it's not like it's a new threat. It's just that AI makes it sort of a fresh hell for all of us trying to fight that fight. And I think, that's a thing.
It's interesting. For the longest time, they were always saying the phishing emails were poorly written, so security people wouldn't bother them and they would get excluded. And now the phishing emails have gotten pretty accurate. They're like, oh, well, now anyone can get caught. But realistically, it's just like that. You have to just know, like, should this have come to this account? Are there weird links? If not, ignore.
Well, I can see a time when you were using AI to analyze every email that comes in and score it instead of just straight math. Right now, most spam algorithms and things like that, phishing algorithms, are really simple models. They're not very advanced. Once AI becomes fast enough to do that stuff in near real time, I guarantee you we'll be running them through a sieve that says, was this AI generated? There are algorithms out there today that could tell you, if you take a ChatGPT response and stick it in them, they'll say, yep, this was ChatGPT. Or no, it wasn't, right? So there's already a defensive model out there. Schools are starting to use them to fight plagiarism. Not plagiarism, but works that are not really generated by the person. If you're a great prompt writer, that might be a job in the future. Being a really good prompt, right? Like being a good SQL query writer, it's the same idea, right? Getting something out of ChatGPT or any other generative AI, you have to write the prompt. The better you write the prompt, the better the output. So that's interesting for the phishing and the generated content from a defensive perspective, making people more aware, because everyone's so busy now. That's the problem. It's an attention span issue, typically.
Ali,
All right.
can you think of any other potential future defensive uses of AI?
Any other? I think we came up with a bunch already, right? So I could see using AI to actually analyze code. I mean, I might upset some folks on this call, but I go through lots of third-party pen tests, and most of the stuff they generate is garbage, and those are humans doing it. So I could see a generative AI model doing a pen test or code scan or code review much better than a human could, and showing those real problems. So using it defensively to review code, do threat modeling even, right? Because it's such a detailed thing, and there's not enough people right now. This is the big thing with ISC2 as well, the push for more certified professionals. We have a 2-3 million person shortage, and people are stretched thin already. So the quality of the work is really just going. So I don't know if you guys have been involved in a third-party pen test lately, but we just went through one for a client, and the output, and it wasn't cheap, was horrible. I mean, horrible. So I could see that being a way to use it. Checking email, content, using it internally. I had a client actually who was using it defensively, actually in a legal case with the state for taxes. So they were using generative AI to respond to the letters they were getting from the state, because it was just so good at writing legal text with references that every time they would just baffle the tax collectors, and they just kept doing it over, and they just kept sending it back. So there's a defensive method right there to deal with that problem. So it's like, if you think of anything that you have to spend a lot of time thinking about that has really very little value for your work going forward, all of those things could be handed off to a well-designed model, and not just do all the work for you, but do the grunt work so that you could then think about it and then add your whatever you needed to add to it, and then finish it off.
Yeah, to add to that, I mean, sort of like our previous discussion on how we might use AI, the bad guys and the good guys are doing that model where the machines generate it. So like hosted XDR or whatever, or even hosted SIEMs, like where, yeah, the AI does its thing and it's really good, but then it goes to human beings who cull through this for you. And then you only get the stuff that they're like, you should take a look at this. Like the human beings who are highly trained don't do the grunt work. They just look at the output and they're really good at that output. And then they just tell you. So that's like that hybrid approach. Meanwhile, the bad guys are sitting there. They poke holes, they figure stuff out. Maybe they cull social media for information about people who work at your company. Well, that's a lot of garbage, most of it, but it's summarized, and then they can go in and grab the nuggets and just spend their highly paid time just trying to go through those cracks, and not all of them at once, right? So, and that just escalates on both sides as we go forward. So,
yeah, this is kind of an interesting case of the classic offense-defense interplay, right? Anytime there's a new technology, it can be used for good or bad purposes. And those purposes, because there's enough people on the planet and they all have different agendas or modus operandi or sets of interests or what have you, if it can be done, it will be done. Somebody will do it. So good and bad will take place with the new tools. So then it becomes kind of this race between those applications, the way people are using these things for good and for bad. It's always happened through human history, and it'll continue to happen. What's interesting here is that we may get to the point where instead of a lot of human involvement, it'll be more the AI versus AI. But behind the scenes, the human involvement will come with who's creating the better algorithms and models, right? So whoever can stay ahead in the back end that's making all this happen, they'll be able to have the upper hand. But it's going to be a seesaw, and there's going to be interesting applications and some surprising and probably nefarious application that people put these tools to use. So it'll be we're in for a bit of a roller coaster for a while.
think it'll be interesting is it's really good at sifting through data, trying to see the new use cases that come up, because currently even the constructive use cases I've seen could really just be templatized and have like repositories of like, this is how you do things. But then I think the creative part of it will start really getting interesting. People can always add the value of discerning things, but the computer can be excellent at just sifting through huge amounts of data everywhere to give you reasonable options or suggested options.
This isn't a question that's on the question and answer section, but it was something that just popped in my head. I thought would be good to discuss. Do you guys see any specific need for having like AI specific user training, or do you feel that reinforcing existing policies is the better approach?
I think reinforcing existing policies sounds really interesting. I think Ali had given a previous example of like, is it really any different than dropping your company confidential information in Stack Overflow? It's a different tool, a different method, but it's the exact same thing. You should not do that. So I think if you reinforce your current things and just adapt over time and iterate and say, well, how can we make it more interesting, applicable? What are the new concerns of where are people dumping information they shouldn't? I think that'll be a really interesting way of seeing how it goes forward. It's gonna be more scary when they start getting into some of the picture analysis of saying, scan through all these Facebook pictures, grab all the fingerprints and the retinal scans and grab that and shift it over here. I think that'll be much more worrisome.
Yeah. One of the things we've talked about, because we did try to, our general counsel wanted a policy specifically dealing with AIs. And what I told him is like, okay, so we can do that, but you understand like typing something into a Google search is using an AI. And he kind of gets the look on his face. And I'm like, well, just the point being, do you really want to, as someone who understands this stuff, create a taxonomy of different types of AI, which ones are okay, which ones aren't, and then rely on the general user community to be able to navigate that with any kind of success? Because that seems like a fairly low likelihood exercise, right? That they'll be able to make the distinction. Well, when you're dealing with large learning model AIs, make sure you do this. And when did it? So instead of that, like instead of having just an AI policy, like a lot of things, fitting it into your existing policy, which hopefully you have, something about data practices and IP, something about, generating content or not, putting stuff out in the public or not. Just to echo what David was saying, I mean, that's kind of the way you're going to have to do it for a general user base, because being specific about AI is not going to work, at least not with the users I've ever seen, as a general rule.
I just had a new question of, do we see any new branches for cyber coming into fruition due to this? For example, engineers, architects, incident response. I absolutely see that. I would think incident response, absolutely. There's things going on in 4 clouds, 3 environments, and 20 endpoints. I absolutely want AI to help with that. It's already there in many tools. It's gonna get better, but I don't know. Like I was just thinking, like a lot of the use cases we have right now for engineers and architects, there's only so many ways to create a template or to build a secure like model. I think it'll be good for shortcuts and ways to like, what's current information, what are things I should think about, but I'm not sure if it'll necessarily be completely new branches. I think it's just going to enter into every branch. And how can we ask a question, get an answer, and not know anything technical? I think that it's kind of like the executive view with like the green light and the red light. You make it simple enough and it becomes like the standard. That's very easy for people to adapt to.
Yeah, I think it'll just be a specialization, right? You might have someone on your team that's very familiar with the models and that can help you with the threat modeling and architecture. Just like you'd have a DevOps engineer, like that DevOps didn't exist, 4 or 5 years ago? Maybe I'm dating myself, maybe it's 6, 7 years ago, I don't know. But those people were doing things, but they didn't have a name or a title or a category. Now, AI is in the mix. And as we use it to make our lives easier, you're going to want people on the team that understand it, have a really deep understanding of its limitations, what its capabilities are, and where is appropriate to integrate it into the workflow. Like any other tool to help us do better, that would be my point on that. So it's certainly a specialization of many that you may have. So very few security professionals are just one single faceted. We tend to have to be able to understand many areas. So that would just be another area that you may dabble in or dive deep into, you know, for what your use cases are.
I was actually just thinking of some of those old network modeling tools where it was looked so amazing, where you're like, oh, I can put this in and this, and I can create a whole network. Later on for AI, you could say, where are the weaknesses? Where are the threat vectors I'm worried about? That'll be an interesting thing of, again, give me data that I will assess, but give me some ideas. Tell me what you would think when looking at it might be really good benefits from AI.
Exactly. Really good questions, everyone. Thanks. It's really, really great to hear from you guys what you're thinking about. Anything else that we can discuss for you that's relevant to what you're doing today or what you're thinking about? Okay. So I think we're right about the 45-minute mark, right around there. So I think, you know, if there's nothing else that anyone wants us to address or respond to, then we can wrap up for tonight. Mike, David, Joel, Scott, any final comments or thoughts?
I was just thinking, as with everything else, learn about the tools you have available, try and find the best ways they can benefit you and your organization. And I guess train end users. If they have access to sensitive data, they should understand where they should not be putting that sensitive data.
I guess I would just, you know, it's been kind of a theme running through what we're saying, but the first thing of demystifying AI as a label and just understanding that it's another tool set in a long history of tool sets where automation's been done. Once you demystify it, you know, bring it back into the bread and butter of what you do in your organization, that's what's going to lead to your success, not being weird or crazy or knee jerking because of it.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. I think that's definitely been the underscore of this, is that you know, security principles and practices have you know, we've been using for quite some time, and when new technology comes along, doesn't usually change those practices and principles all that much. It's just understanding, okay, how do these tried and true practices and principles apply to this new technology, and kind of sifting out the noise to understand, like, what does this risk really mean? What does it really boil down to?
Yeah, I agree with that. Sorry about some camera issues. Sorry about that. But like Michael was saying, I think that, you know, we were talking about policy earlier. And I think adapting to kind of the new realities that we're facing, you know, the fundamentals haven't changed, like Michael was saying, but some of the scope of things, where you might have to modify some existing policies to expand the scope a little bit, might have to kind of train people differently, like we were talking about the generative AI phishing issues. Things like that will mean that there will be some changes in how behavior, what behavior is appropriate now and steps to take in terms of execution of things. But, you know, those are more, to echo Scott's point, you know, these aren't brand new, completely different things that we have to do. We just have to sort of adapt and modify more incrementally.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. I appreciate everyone taking the time tonight. Panelists, thank you so much. Attendees as well, thanks for taking the time out. I'd love to hear from you guys, all of you. Any feedback about the session, what we could do better? If there's any thoughts, please don't hesitate. We're getting started with this process. Our intention is to have a session every month focused on a different topic. and we want it to be relevant. So if there's topics other than this or more specific areas that you want us to focus on next time, please let us know. We're also open to other panelists from the membership. We're priming the pump as the board, but please feel free to volunteer to attend or to participate. We'd love to have you. My email address is just ali@isc2boulderchapter.org. You have Michael, David, Scott, and Joel as well at isc2boulderchapter.org. So feel free to email us with any thoughts, comments, criticisms. We definitely want to make this valuable time for you to spend. With that, I guess we'll end the meeting. So thanks, everyone. Have a great night. Take care.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.